I want you to imagine, just for a moment, that you're sitting around a fire, like in a very, very ancient time.
Ooh, set in the scene. I like it.
Yeah, you're experiencing the oldest form of human storytelling. And the storyteller at the center of the circle, they don't give you a traditional plot.
Right. No clear hero's journey or whatever.
Exactly. They don't outline a neatly packaged moral. Instead, they present you with a conceptual puzzle. They take two objects that seem completely fundamentally unrelated, and they just place them side by side in the dirt right in front of you.
Okay.
And they ask you a single question. What do these two things share?
Ooh, that's a good hook.
Right. So, on the left, we have a golden feather, and on the right, a glass shoe. What is the invisible thread connecting them?
It is, it's a really disarming way to start a conversation,
Yeah, it totally is.
largely because it forces a very specific kind of neurological engagement.
Yeah.
When we're presented with two totally disparate objects, our brains naturally just hate the dissonance.
You want to make sense of it.
Exactly. We are wired for pattern recognition. So instead of just passively listening to a story, you're suddenly forced to stop looking at the surface of the objects and start examining the negative space between them.
Like you have to actively hunt for the underlying mechanism that binds them together,
Precisely.
which is exactly what we are doing in this deep dive today. We're looking at excerpts from this deeply poetic, really complex text called Relics of Recognition, The Feather in the Shoe.
It's such a fascinating piece of work.
It really is. And our mission today is to explore these two distinct parables, extract the hidden truths they hold about self-actualization, and uncover what these physical objects reveal about the internal thresholds every single one of us has to cross.
Yeah, it's a text that basically uses folklore to ask some incredibly demanding questions about human psychology.
It totally does. Okay, let's unpack this, because it essentially invites you to examine your own history of transformation, right?
Right, but through a very analytical, almost detached lens.
Hmm.
It strips away all that romanticism we usually attach to our own life changes and just asks us to look at the raw mechanics of how we actually move forward.
So true. So let's start with the first parable, which centers on the golden feather. The text sets this up with, incredibly specific, vivid world building.
Oh yeah, the atmosphere's wild.
It takes place in a time, and I'm quoting here, before clocks, when the world still remembered how to be still.
Wow.
And in this setting, there's a mystical bird that no one has ever managed to see twice. It just leaves behind exactly one golden feather wherever it passes.
And the folklore surrounding this feather is that whoever finds it, they carry away something very um, difficult to articulate.
Yeah, it's not straightforward magic.
Right. The text explicitly clarifies that it isn't luck, and it isn't like a blessing or a protective charm. It is described as a kind of readiness.
A readiness, I love that.
Yeah, the phrasing used is that finding the feather results in the world quietly agreeing to lean in your direction.
That's so beautifully put. And then we meet the protagonist of this first section, right? A young woman who actually finds one of these singular golden feathers.
But the context of her finding it is crucial here.
It's everything. She isn't on a grand quest. She hasn't climbed a mountain to seek enlightenment or whatever. She's just standing at the edge of a barren field where she had gone simply to cry.
Yeah, she's completely empty,
Exactly. The text actually says she'd completely given up looking for anything at all.
which aligns perfectly with what we know about how profound psychological shifts actually occur in the real world.
Oh, totally. Like hitting rock bottom.
Yeah, I mean, often the ego and our internal defense mechanisms, they have to be completely exhausted before any new information can even get in. She isn't seeking magic because she literally doesn't have the energy to seek anything.
Right. She picks up the feather merely because it's a striking anomaly in the dirt. And this is the line that really anchors the whole allegory for me. It says she picked it up, quote, because her hands needed to hold something that wasn't grief.
Oof. Yeah, that line hits hard.
I paused for a long time on that specific line. Her hands needed to hold something that wasn't grief. It moves the story completely away from fairy tale magic and directly into somatic psychology.
It really grounds it in the physical body.
Yes, because grief isn't just a mental state, it physically occupies the body. When a person is trapped in a rumination loop of despair, sometimes the only way to break that loop is through a tactile, physical interruption.
She needed a sensory disruption.
Exactly. It reminds me of the psychological mechanism behind the placebo effect, or even like basic cognitive behavioral therapy techniques.
That's a great point. I think the placebo analogy is highly relevant here. How do you see that operating in this specific context?
Well, so a placebo works because the human brain is essentially a prediction engine, right? If you believe a sugar pill is going to cure your headache, your brain anticipates the relief and actually triggers the release of endogenous
Right,
opioids.
your body's natural painkillers.
Exactly. The pill didn't do the work. It just gave the brain permission to deploy its own
That
resources.
makes perfect sense.
So when this woman picks up the feather, it doesn't possess some glowing radioactive magical property. It's just a physical token that shifts her internal posture just a fraction of an inch.
Hmm.
And that is exactly enough to bypass her own resistance to change.
What's fascinating here is how the text supports that interpretation beautifully through the pacing of her
Oh
transformation.
yeah, the pacing is so slow.
Right, it is not an instant cinematic fix. She takes the feather home, she drops it into a bowl on her table, and the narrative notes that she literally forgets about it for weeks.
Just leaves it there.
Yeah, but things begin to open up slowly, the way seasons move when you stop watching for them.
That's gorgeous. And that's the mechanism of behavioral activation at work. It's imperceptible at first. You don't just notice a habit forming or a depression lifting in a single afternoon.
It's not overnight.
No, it happens in these tiny micro adjustments until one day you wake up and realize the temperature of your life is just different.
And for her, the right people begin to arrive in her life. The right doors suddenly stand ajar. She begins to trust the weight of her own footsteps again. And then the text makes this profound, almost subversive assertion for a fairy tale.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
It notes that she suspected the feather actually did absolutely nothing.
Right. Because the readiness had already been coiled inside her the entire time. The feather simply acted as the physical catalyst. It was a projection screen for her own dormant agency.
Exactly.
And I want you, the person listening to this right now, to consider the feathers in your own life. Think about those seemingly random occurrences, like a passing comment from a stranger, or an impulsive purchase, or a new routine you adopted during a really low point.
Things that didn't literally fix anything.
Right. Practically speaking, they didn't solve your underlying problem at all, but somehow they broke the spell of your own stuckness. They didn't do the heavy lifting, but they initiated the momentum.
And significantly, the woman in the text keeps the feather. She leaves it in the bowl. It transitions from being a catalyst to becoming a monument.
A monument.
Yeah, it's a physical record of the moment she allowed herself to begin.
Which brings us to a fascinating contrast with our second object. Because if the golden feather explores the mechanics of hitting rock bottom and the quiet initiation of movement, the second story presents a completely different, almost contradictory problem.
The other end of the spectrum.
Exactly. What happens when you've already reached the summit? This is about the aftermath of the happily ever after.
So we're introduced to the parable of the shoe. And the text frames this as the quiet, realistic epilogue that most people intentionally skip over.
Yeah, nobody wants to read about Tuesday after the wedding.
Right. It is the story of Cinderella, but years after the glass slipper has been returned and the grand royal wedding is completely faded into memory. The prince and the girl are now a king and a queen.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh.
Because the text strips away the pageantry immediately. It describes the couple navigating, quote, the small dignities and small failures of a shared life.
It grounds the fairy tale in the mundane reality of long-term partnership.
And governance. The magic is thoroughly over. Now it's just, a Tuesday morning at the palace, and there are trade routes to manage and children to raise.
And amidst all of this, we learn the fate of the glass shoe. It is not displayed on a velvet pillow in the throne room. It's not paraded out for state holidays.
No.
It is kept locked in a dark cabinet in the queen's private chamber. It is entirely out of sight.
Okay, and I really struggle with this specific detail. Let's look at human nature for a second here.
Okay, let's look at it.
If I managed to pull myself out of literal ashes, survived systemic abuse from a stepfamily, and an object proved my inherent worth to an entire kingdom, elevating me to royalty,
Yeah,
I am mounting that glass shoe on a pedestal in the main hall with a spotlight on it.
you want everyone to see it.
Of course. Taking the ultimate symbol of your vindication and hiding it in a private cabinet feels almost like shame. Like, why would the ultimate triumph of self-actualization result in someone hiding the evidence?
Well, the text actually provides the answer.
Mm-hmm.
But it requires us to look at the conversation that happens when her youngest daughter eventually discovers the cabinet.
Right, the daughter finds it.
Yeah, the daughter pulls the shoe out and is immediately struck by its physical impossibility. It's described as incredibly fragile, made of a material that logically should just shatter under the weight of a human being.
It makes no sense physically.
Exactly.
Mm.
So the daughter brings it to the queen and asks, "What is this?"
And the queen's response is arguably the most pivotal line in the entire text. She sits down, she looks at the shoe, and she says, "That is the thing I wore when I was recognized."
The daughter naturally follows up by asking, "Recognized by whom?"
Right, and the trap here, and I fell for it too, is that every reader automatically assumes she means the prince.
Oh, absolutely.
The prince recognized her from the ball. The shoe fit. The kingdom rejoiced. But the queen thinks for a long time and replies, "By myself. The prince was just the occasion."
Ooh. The prince was just the occasion. I mean, it completely dismantles the external validation that the entire Cinderella myth is built upon.
It dismantles it, yes, but honestly, it still doesn't explain the locked cabinet to me. I mean, if she recognized her own power, if she claimed her own space in the world, that is a massive psychological victory.
Yep.
It reinforces my initial thought, why hide the symbol of your own profound self-recognition?
This raises an important question, though, because self-recognition is not a static event, right? It's a terrifying ongoing process.
Okay.
The daughter intuitively senses the weight of the object she's holding, and she asks the queen the exact question that gets to the heart of why it's hidden. Does it still fit?
And the queen gives this very complicated smile and admits she doesn't know because she has never dared to try it on again.
Exactly. She tells her daughter that she is afraid that it would fit and equally afraid that it wouldn't. She hasn't decided which fear carries more weight.
Wow.
And if we break down the psychology of those two distinct fears, the locked cabinet makes perfect sense.
Let's analyze that dual fear because it's such a brilliant representation of the burden of past success. I mean,
Yep.
if she puts the shoe on and it no longer fits, she faces a profound sense of loss.
A loss of her former self.
Right. It means she has physically and emotionally outgrown the girl who possessed that pure, raw magic. She's been hardened by those small dignities and small failures of ruling a kingdom.
The magic has faded.
Yeah, and she is just a normal, flawed human being now.
That is the fear of losing the peak experience.
Mm-hmm.
But the second fear, the fear that the shoe does still fit perfectly, is arguably much more paralyzing.
Why do you think that is?
Well, if it fits, it implies stagnation. It means that despite a decade of ruling, despite all her intellectual growth as a monarch and emotional growth as a mother, her defining measurement is exactly the same as it was when she was a desperate, traumatized girl in the ashes waiting for an escape.
Oh, that's heavy.
It is. It's a phenomenon closely related to identity foreclosure, where a person becomes entirely defined by a single past event and cannot integrate new versions of themselves.
That tension is agonizing. She is terrified of outgrowing her miracle and utterly terrified of being trapped by it forever.
Yes, trapped by her own myth.
And we all have these peak moments, a major career breakthrough or a foundational relationship or maybe a piece of art we created that everyone loved. We hold on to the relics of those moments.
We cling to them.
But we are deeply hesitant to test our current selves against them again because we don't know who we are relative to that past definitive version of ourselves.
And the daughter understands this without having the adult vocabulary to actually articulate it. She feels the immense psychological weight of the shoe, and she quietly just puts it back in the cabinet.
She just leaves it alone.
Yeah, she respects the boundary between the queen's present identity and her historical myth.
Which brings us all the way back to the campfire, right? And the core puzzle the storyteller posed. We have the feather, found in a field in a moment of complete cognitive exhaustion, acting as a quiet catalyst for a journey.
Yep.
And we have the shoe, kept hidden in a cabinet, representing the complex, often frightening aftermath of a completed journey.
Two very different objects.
So what does this all mean? What do these two seemingly contradictory objects actually share?
The text synthesizes them with a single phrase. It states, "Both are relics of a threshold crossed."
Relics of a threshold crossed. I mean, it recontextualizes everything we've discussed because it explicitly strips the objects of their power. Neither object actually did the work.
No, the narrative makes it very clear that both the feather and the shoe simply witnessed a woman becoming something she already possessed the capacity to be.
They were just there.
Right. The physical items were necessary focal points, yes, but they were not the source of the transformation. The true source was always the internal psychological crossing of a threshold.
There is a definition of magic in this section of the text that I think fundamentally alters how we should view self-development.
Oh, the part about the fire and thunder.
Yes. It says that true magic does not arrive in fire or thunder. It arrives when a woman stops fighting what she is and the world, quiet, waiting, always watching, simply steps aside.
It's a radical shift from an external locus of control to an internal one. Human beings are deeply conditioned to look for the fire and the thunder.
We want the fireworks.
We really do. We want external validation to prove we are worthy. We wait for the promotion, the perfect partner, or the sudden stroke of algorithmic luck to validate our existence.
Yep, the external saviors.
But the text uses these objects to dismantle that reflex entirely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the feather's message is, you were already ready. And the shoe's message is, you were already known.
For you listening, I think this is the most confrontational part of the deep dive. Just think about it. How often do you credit your external tools, your lucky breaks, or the people who open doors for you, your own personal feathers and princes, for your survival or your success?
We do it all the time.
All the time. We build narratives that say, I only survived that year because I found this specific job, or I only discovered my worth because this person loved me.
Right.
When in reality, those external factors were just the occasion. They were the staging ground. They merely witnessed you deploying a resilience or a brilliance that you already owned.
It is empowering,
Yeah.
certainly, but it also strips away a very comforting excuse.
Oh, it really does.
If you accept that the magic wasn't in the feather or the shoe, it demands that you take full ownership of your own internal readiness. You can no longer outsource your transformation or your failures to the presence or absence of a magical item.
But the author isn't quite done with us yet.
No, they're not.
Just when the allegory seems fully resolved, the text delivers a final conceptual twist that reframes the entire discussion.
It introduces a paradox. The text states that the story is fundamentally about both objects, but then in the very next sentence, it claims the story is actually about neither of them.
Which is mind-bending. The profound conclusion of the text is that the true story, the actual undeniable magic, exists entirely in the moment between.
The in-between.
Yes, it is about the microscopic fraction of a second when the hand reaches for the feather or when the foot lifts toward the shoe.
It shifts the focus completely from the objects to the human action. And why is that moment so critical? Because neurologically, the human brain has a profound intolerance for uncertainty.
We hate it.
We will often choose guaranteed suffering over an unknown outcome. So the space between standing in the ashes and sliding your foot into the glass shoe, that is a space of pure, terrifying uncertainty.
The text calls it the suspended instant. And that phrase is just brilliant because it captures the vulnerability of that microsecond.
So precarious.
Before her hand touches the feather, the woman in the field is still completely consumed by grief. The moment she touches it, the seasons of her life begin to shift. Before her foot slides into the shoe, she is a servant subject to cruelty. The moment it fits, she is a sovereign queen. But the transformation doesn't happen in the before or the after. It happens in the reach. It happens in the lift.
It is the commitment to the action before the outcome is known. When you lift your foot, you don't know if the shoe will fit and elevate you, or if it will shatter and leave you bleeding. When you reach for the feather, you don't know if it will initiate healing or just be another piece of dirt in a barren field. The courage required to inhabit that suspended instant, to risk the brain's hatred of uncertainty, is the actual mechanism of self-actualization.
The text summarizes this entire complex philosophy with the phrase, one truth told slant.
I love that phrase.
It implies that the reality of human transformation is too internal, It's too invisible to look at directly. We can't put a profound psychological shift under a microscope.
No, you can't measure it like that.
The only way we can understand our own evolution is by examining the objects, the physical relics that bracket that invisible moment of choice.
The feather and the shoe are simply the physical evidence that the reach occurred. They are the proof that, despite the paralyzing fear of the unknown, the foot was lifted.
This has been an incredibly layered exploration. I mean, we started by looking at a woman in a sorrowful, quiet field who bypassed her own grief-stricken defenses by picking up a golden feather.
We really went on a journey.
And we traveled all the way to a private royal cabinet, dissecting the psychological tension of a queen who guards a glass shoe, completely paralyzed by what it might reveal about who she has become.
They are two vastly different narratives representing two entirely different stages of human development. yet they are bound together by the exact same underlying mechanism.
So true.
The world steps aside not when we acquire the right magical asset, but when we finally surrender to our own inherent readiness.
As we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final thought to examine in your own life, drawing directly from the mechanics of the text we've just unpacked.
Yeah, if the true transformation genuinely occurs entirely within that suspended instant, that fleeting, terrifying microsecond when your hand reaches out or your foot lifts into the unknown, what exactly happens to the relics in your life once their job is finished?
That's the big question. Think about the specific objects, the hard-won job titles, the awards, or even the foundational relationships that served as the occasion for your own thresholds being crossed.
Once you have made the reach, once you have stepped fully into the new, evolved version of yourself, how do you relate to those items?
Do you leave them out on the table like a feather in a bowl, utilizing them as a gentle, grounding reminder of where your journey began?
Or do you hide them away in a dark cabinet like a fragile glass shoe, a little bit afraid of their heavy legacy and the stagnation they might represent?
Or, and this might be the hardest one, do you eventually do the hardest work of all and learn to let them go entirely, trusting with absolute certainty that the readiness they once witnessed is now permanently, irrevocably a part of who you are?
It's a lot to think about.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Take a close look around your own life, keep your eyes open, and keep looking for your own golden feathers.